co-op, and I gotta hit that, got it. And then I'm gonna share my screen and kind of walk through a couple of things. Ooh, do I have share access? Hold on. There you go. Okay, can you guys see that okay? Perfect. So this is our new website. We're super excited, giving Zach Schwartz here in Great Falls a shout out on that. But if you come down into our different tabs right here under resources, you can walk into that. And then we're publishing a number of toolkits on cooperative development work in a variety of different industries and fields. And so our childcare toolkit is one of our first ones. And you can just click on that and it will take you through the written version of it. We do have this in print as well, and there is one area in the print that we actually need to get over onto our website, I noticed this morning. But the purpose of this toolkit is really just to walk you through kind of what each step of developing a co-op would be. And the first part is this exploratory phase. Coming down, what we've done is there's some really great links. And so we spent a lot of time over the last year and a half to 2 years really kind of seeing what other states and agencies were working on similar activities. We found this on Child Care Aware. We do get permission to share. And this is just a child care center needs assessment that we thought was really a good one to kind of start getting some of that initial activity going. Where are you at? What's happening in your community? That kind of stuff. When you're developing a co-op, it's very similar to a business in the sense that you do need to kind of, is this the type of, what is that feasibility? What is it that you're trying to meet needs of, and is it feasible? So what we also walk you through is understanding the different types of cooperative business structures and what a co-op is in general. So another link that I can share is this, what is a co-op? So our partners, the National Cooperative Business Association, has some really great language on how they are working, what is the key components of them, and the 7 guiding principles. So we encourage people to read through those and make sure that this is a business model that's going to work for it. The key thing about cooperatives to remember is that at the end of the day, they need to be membership owned, membership benefited, and membership controlled. No one person can ever own a co-op by themselves or one business or company. And so you also have a very democratic process in place. And sometimes that's where people get a little like, ooh, is this right for us or not? And there's nothing wrong if you choose not to be a co-op, but we just wanted to make sure that people know what they are. As you move through and continue to go through the childcare toolkit, we talk about, who do you need at the table? We have a little bit more in an appendix that I'll show at the end, but one of the key things is this roles and responsibility of a steering committee. So that when we get through and kind of our initial thing from the Montana Co-op Development Center is we meet with communities or individuals that are looking at solving a need in their community. And from those initial meetings, if after the Co-op 101 is done and we're sure that there's still an interest and people want to move forward, we really see the development of what's called a steering committee. And the roles and responsibilities and requirements of a steering committee is really important because we're not the program managers or the project managers. We come in and help guide people through the development, bringing in templates and some expertise, but we can't call meetings. We don't know your community as well as you do. So you really need to kind of make sure that you're developing and having people on the steering committee that's going to be the champions and move forward. Most childcare co-ops have a community aspect to it. So we did include how can you kind of engage in your community. And then there's some more feasibility study guide information and a really great link to a study guide there. So in partnership with the 0 to 5, a couple of years ago, we had started down the road with a handful of communities at where they were developing cooperative processes. So we have some initial case studies in what they learned and why they chose to go different routes. And we thought those were really important. But throughout the process, we really do encourage to make sure the cooperative model is still going to be what you need to do. As we continue to move forward, we talk about then how do you get into the planning phase. This is really the nuts and bolts of a business cooperative component. And so we've got some different links here, but it's really looking at what is the business. As I said earlier, a childcare cooperative should also be it needs to be feasible. Can you make it? So we have a lot of different things about the financial component of it, and we often would bring in 0 to 5 business staff to make sure that we're working and making sure that this is a viable business. One of the things that we'll also be doing is working with the steering committee on developing bylaws. Your bylaws are kind of the structure of what that cooperative component is going to look like. So who are your members? How much are they going to pay for their initial stock? Are you going to ask for investors? Who can vote? Who can't vote? What does the board look like? How many times would you meet? Just how do you want to run that company is really within the bylaws. And that's where you see a lot of our staff engagement, because that gives us a lot of the outline and ability to kind of help guide you guys into it. You'll see again, we recommend making sure that cooperative model works. And then as we move you into the legal phase, this part of the toolkit talks about the different kinds. And then we have templates for all of this, but it's just walks you through the legal component of incorporating your cooperative. We also included some really cool best practices and some additional resources towards the end of this. And then we have our appendix. This cooperative flowchart has changed. As I started to prep for this meeting, I realized that we hadn't changed it on our toolkit here, so we'll get that updated. It's still very similar, just kind of making sure that you've got those steps and is this a good co-op or not. And then the other component here is there's a multitude of different models of cooperatives that could potentially fit a childcare need in your community. And so we go through briefly the different types. My team is pretty well versed in all of this. So if you were to bring them into your community, or you've got a group of business owners, or you've got a group of childcare providers that want to create like a shared equity model, we really walk you through these different types of kinds of cooperative models and see which one would fit on that. Here's that roles and responsibility of the steering committee. Trying to just be really upfront and making sure that people that engage in that are knowing what they're engaging in, and they are going to want to move forward. What we'll see is sometimes there's people that have we'll see like an HR person or an attorney or an accountant, like, hey, we want to help, but we don't really want to be involved. We kind of will create an advisory committee sometimes for the steering committee to bounce ideas off of, but those that have a value but don't necessarily have the passion behind it, or just want to kind of stay behind the scenes and help, those kind of move into an advisory committee from time to time, because the steering committee really does create the business and spend some, I mean, the time spent is really up to them, but it can be once a month, it can be twice a month. It really depends on how fast the community wants to move forward and how detailed they're going to make their co-op. Lastly, we have a couple other appendixes. There's a really great community action plan to kind of help your steering committee move forward in how you're engaging with the community. What are those next steps going to be? And then I believe Alex and Caitlin, we stole this one from you guys, but this appendix is why should employers invest in childcare, trying to really promote that employer engagement. We do have a budget template. Our Nebraska counterparts have helped create this budget template. It's something to use, and then a variety of resources. So that's the toolkit, down and dirty. Alex, I didn't know if you wanted to go through anything else.
If I can find my unmute button. No, I think that's great. Why don't we just hop in and see if anyone has some initial questions or areas that they'd like to dive into a little bit more? I'll just open it up to attendees.
Hi, my name's Eleanor. I'm out in Forsyth, actually, and I'm just wondering, I guess, between size and involvement, kind of not that there's a sweet spot or, perfect number for anything with a co-op, but I'm just wondering for a smaller community, like, what is the number of involved participants that you would suggest be like on board? Like, is it just like a three people who are like, hey, we should do this, get more people? Or is it like I'm just wondering, like, what is that starting number that you would suggest just in our efforts to kind of
Sure,
um
Eleanor.
yeah.
So through the state law, in any of the co-op models that we have outlined for childcare, you're going to be under what's called a Chapter 15 cooperative association. By state law, you have to have at least 3 people. So that gives you your baseline. Our sweet spot is, even in smaller communities, just working with so many different steering committees in different capacity, 5 to 7. Now, it also is going to depend on each community, though. So we never approach any community with a cookie cutter template, as much as here's some of our processes and guidelines, but we definitely make sure that we're working with you to make it fit your community and what your need is. And so if you only have 3, that's great. We can move forward. If you have over that once you get into that 9-11, as with any working with a group and the steering committee component, it just depends on what their roles are and how passionate they're going to be. And so we really take the lead by you on how many you want and who do you think needs to come to the table. And it also will depend on what kind of co-op you're going to be forming too. If it's a handful of service providers, they don't necessarily need to have as big of a steering committee because they're doing it more for their individual businesses, looking at shared services or something. If it's a group of employers that are hoping to invest into a co-op or into a childcare facility, they might want to be a little bit larger. And so case by case. I know that's not clear, but it's really case by case.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Tracy, I'd be curious if you could speak to kind of some childcare cooperative models that you think are promising for the childcare realm.
Sure. So down here in appendix 1.1 is the different models that we've identified. This is going through a variety of our counterparts. So there's co-op development centers across the US, and we're part of this big network. So we did dive in and really kind of look at it. I think that the ones that jump out to me, I'm going to say parent owned has such a true value. There is a concern with parent owned, though, because I think parents tend to age out with their children. So making sure succession planning's in that one. But I do think that there's power behind that parent owned one, as long as there's some good planning on how to go through it. This employer-owned cooperative model is another one that I think we're going to start seeing. And this is where we've seen a lot of focus to date of cooperative conversation, is employers coming together saying, we need to figure out a childcare solution for our employees. And so this is what we initially started when we first started getting into childcare 4 or 5 years ago. And it was a group of employers that brought us into it. I think that has potential, as well as a share or a multi-stakeholders, to where you could have employers and parents be stakeholders in the same one. That might help that sustainability with the parent component. A worker co-op model, this is where the employees own it. I think that one, there's only a few that I've been able to find in the US so far, but I do think that there's several benefits along with that, because we all know workforce is challenging. So if the workers own it, is the potential then that they're going to stay longer. Or again, you could put them in a multi-stakeholder where maybe it's employers, workers, and parents. And then this one, our investment childcare cooperative model, Alex, I would say this is where we've been seeing the most interest coming. Is a lot of employers are bringing us in to talk about housing and childcare needs for their staff, to keep retaining employees. And so, but they don't want to own a childcare system. They don't want to be the owners of it. They don't know how to run it. They want to figure out a solution though. So what we're seeing is a lot of the communities are exploring an investment co-op model where they can pull their money and invest in either current cooperative childcare facilities or providers, with the hope that they can also maybe retain some slots specific for their employees. So I would say that is probably the one that we're seeing the most of right now.
I'm curious, Tracy, if while you guys are working with communities, if you pick up on any like characteristics that might lead you to thinking that they would be good candidates for co-ops, aside from like, the obvious that they just reach out to you.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, Shelby, that when we're being brought into a community, we really do have that kind of initial conversation. And I think we're also the first ones to say it's not a co-op. You can often tell that is probably an easier characteristic than what is a good co-op, because there's one or two people that are just, they want to take charge, they want to own it, they want to operate it, which is completely fine. We kind of want to get out of their way and let them run with it then. But I would say when you really have a group of concerned citizens, community members, employers, whoever those are, and they are very engaged, they're really talking about it. They're like, this is an issue. They've done some homework. They know, and once that we've gone through that co-op 101, they understand the democratic and the ownership components of it, and they still want to move forward. If you are in your community though, and you're just like, is this a good solution or not? I would recommend, talking to some community leaders or going to your chamber and visiting with them and saying, hey, is a co-op something we should explore? Should we at least have a conversation around this and see what kind of engagement you might see come up? And then the biggest tell is when you ask that hard question, would anybody step forward to be on a steering committee? If you have people stepping forward to be on that steering committee, you've got a good chance that's going to continue forward. If you've got a lot of people going, I don't know, or being voluntold or whatever, that makes us a little hesitant. Like, you don't want to force anybody to be engaged.
Tracy, I have a question kind of on the same lines of that question from Shelby too, but kind of like taking maybe a step further or deeper. But if you're a childcare provider, maybe this seems like a good idea, or your community partner, what would you advise you do to prepare for that first meeting with you guys? Like, if you're coming to the community, what would you want to see already kind of in the works?
For us, Alex, what we would want to kind of see some movement is maybe some initial understanding of what the childcare landscape is in that specific community. And that you have already maybe talked to some of the providers so that you're not getting that backlash. You're trying to solve something that may be perceived as already solved. So kind of understanding what the dynamics are. Also give that to us if we're going to have some naysayers in the room, or we're going to have some concerned people. That's always very beneficial before we walk in to facilitate that initial meeting. And then I would also want to see some community, maybe some conversations, like you've gone and you've talked to your chamber. If you have an economic developer, have you talked to some of the, not necessarily political leaders, but maybe some business leaders, really seeing, is there an interest, or other people, maybe it's parents at the school or whatever that case may be, but that you've done a little bit of groundwork to make sure there's some interested people. We've done co-op 101s with a group as small as like 2 or 3, and they've moved forward. Though it's been on more of an investment side, because then they're like, oh, we get this, we want to move it forward, and they've brought others into it. But then we've seen, like, we've gone in and presented to communities of 100 plus, and they haven't. So again, case by case, but we want to see some activity that you know the need at least a little bit, and that you've taken some initiative to put some people in a room to talk about it. So I don't know if there's other questions. I would recommend, like, this is a living document. So as we continue to grow our cooperative childcare program, we'll continue to update. As I said, we've already got a new flow chart that we'll need to update in here. But as we develop more resources, that's the other thing our office has been doing, is just kind of creating more internal and external resources, so we can definitely kind of keep this updated as that happens. I would also recommend that people, we've got, if you're just general in regular co-ops, understanding what co-ops are, we do have publications and some video resources here as well. And then if there's anything that people want from us, we're always happy to come in and help, even if it's just an initial one phone call.
So if individuals are looking at this childcare cooperative toolkit and they're like, we've kind of already started this conversation, and they want to touch base with you, what's the best way to get in contact with MCDC?
So you can use this phone number right here, 727-271-517. That takes you to our direct office. You can leave a message there, and we can get one of our team members to get a hold of you. We are also, if you want to send us a note, this is a great way of doing it. In our About Us page, we are looking at having kind of who would you contact of the team for specific projects like that. For the most part, childcare comes to me first, and then I kind of will see, who's working in that area, what kind. If it's an investment model, it's going to go to Nicole. If it's another one, it's probably going to go to Davey, but we'll see. I mean, we kind of play that by ear.
And last question before we wrap up this wonderful overview. Do your services cost communities? Is there a fee associated with it?
So our services do have some fees, but not usually for the development of cooperatives. So we have received federal and state funding specifically to help people develop new co-ops. So for the most part, those are all free. You can go into here and see kind of what we're doing. But the biggest thing there is we also have funds to help cover most legal costs, unless it's just exorbitant, and then we'll have to talk to you case by case to say, hey, we can't cover all of this, and we can't cover your initial filing fees. But our time for the duration of you forming is usually free. There's always an exception, so I'm not promising. There can be, like, if we're actually writing the feasibility study or something, there might be some fees attached to that. But then what we do also is about a 3-year incubation period. So what's really cool about our office is we're also the administrators for the Montana Council of Cooperatives. So what we kind of, as a new co-op forms, we help them get through formation, through all of their incorporation. We also can help develop funding scenarios, business plans, those type of things, either us or our partners. And then for the first 3 years, you're kind of still in that free service range. After that, we kind of want to encourage you to become part of the overall Montana cooperative community, and then become, as a council of co-op members, we can get you services through them.
Thanks.
Sure.
Any
Thank you.
last questions from the audience before we wrap up? All right. Yeah, thanks again, Tracy. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to continuing to partner, and excited for all the work that's happening around the state.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you guys, and we'll see you guys at the next webinar when we dive into investment co-ops.
Great.
All right. Thank you guys. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.